The autumn wind didn't just smell like pine, it smelled like desperation. Sophia Dawson felt it in her lungs with every ragged breath. She stood on the church steps, her arms shaking, not from the cold, but from the weight of her decision, and the weight of her 3-month-old daughter, Lily. Tears cut clean paths through the dust on her face, each one a tiny river of grief. She'd walked for 5 hours, her feet screaming inside her worn-out boots, to get to this place. Promise Valley. A town with a name like a cruel joke. Because the only promise she had left was a hollow one she kept whispering to her baby. "It'll be all right, Lily. You'll see." But she didn't believe it. Not for a second. Her husband, Thomas, was dead. A mining accident 4 months ago had stolen him, leaving her pregnant, broke, and evicted. She had nothing. Lily had nothing, except the Sisters of Mercy, the orphanage. Sophia stared at the heavy oak doors of the church. Behind them was a choice that was tearing her soul apart. Give up her child. Abandon the only piece of Thomas she had left. All for the hope that someone else, someone better, could give Lily a life. Food, a roof, a future that didn't involve starving on the side of a dirt road. She took one step up, then another. Her body felt like it was filled with lead. One more minute. She begged herself, just one more minute to be a mother. To memorize the feel of Lily in her arms, the scent of her hair, the perfect curve of her cheek. The church door creaked open. A woman in a nun's habit stood there, her face calm, her eyes seeming to understand everything in a single glance. "My child," she said softly. "Would you like to come inside?" Sophia's voice was a choked whisper. I've come about the orphanage." The nun's eyes softened. "Sister Agnes handles those matters. She will be available after evening prayers." She paused. "You can wait inside with us." Sophia shook her head. "I'll wait out here." The nun nodded and went back inside, leaving Sophia alone on the steps as the sky bruised from orange to purple. The townspeople filed out after the service, their curious glances like tiny stones pelting her skin. Finally, an older nun appeared. Iron-gray hair, eyes as sharp as a hawk's. "I'm Sister Agnes," she said, her voice leaving no room for nonsense. "I'm told you've come about the orphanage." Sophia struggled to her feet. "Yes, sister, I can't care for her anymore." Sister Agnes's expression didn't change, not one bit. "Come inside. We can talk in my office." The office was a small, cold room, a desk, a chair, and shelves filled with ledgers that probably held 1,000 stories just as sad as hers. Sophia sank into the chair, clutching Lily, who had thankfully fallen asleep. Sister Agnes sat behind the desk, her pen poised over a large book. "Your name." "Sophia Dawson." "The baby's name." "Lily. Lily. Marie Dawson." The pen scratched against the paper, a sound like a nail being driven into a coffin. "And her father." "Thomas Dawson. He died before she was born." Sister Agnes didn't offer sympathy. She just made a note. "And your situation?" The question was a dam breaking. The whole story poured out of Sophia. The eviction, the fruitless search for work, the hunger. "I've tried everything," she sobbed, "but I can't watch her starve. I can't." Sister Agnes set down her pen. Her gaze was intense, analytical. "The orphanage is quite full, Mrs. Dawson. An outbreak of scarlet fever in Millstone." Sophia's heart plummeted. "However," the nun continued, "we never turn away a child in need. We would find a place for her. The papers would be final. You would relinquish all rights. Her name might even be changed." Each word was a hammer blow. Change her name. Erase the last trace of Thomas. It was too much to bear. But what choice did she have? Her hand trembled as she looked at the surrender papers Sister Agnes pushed across the desk. "This is not a decision to be made lightly," the nun said. Sophia stared at the words, "Certificate of Surrender," and felt the world tilt. She was about to sign away her own heart. Then Sister Agnes said something that stopped her cold. "There is another option, you know." Sophia looked up, a painful flicker of hope igniting in her chest. "What option?" "There's a ranch, 10 miles west of here, the Galloway place." Sister Agnes leaned forward, her sharp eyes seeming to pierce right through Sophia. "The owner, a Mr. Xavier Galloway, has been looking for a housekeeper since his wife passed. It would include room and board, for you and the child." It sounded too good to be true. Why would he hire me? No one else would. A strange, knowing smile touched the nun's lips. "Because Mr. Galloway is a man who values character above circumstance." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And I may have put in a good word for you." Sophia was completely bewildered. "A good word? But how did you know I was coming?" The smile widened just a fraction. "Word travels, Mrs. Dawson. A young widow with a newborn, walking from Copper Creek. People notice. People talk." Sister Agnes stood up, her authority filling the small room. "I knew you were coming, and I knew you were a good woman in a desperate situation." The revelation was unsettling. It felt like she was a piece on a chessboard she didn't even know she was playing on. Sister Agnes gestured to a door. "Sleep here tonight. In the morning, you will make your choice. Sign the papers, or walk to the Galloway ranch." Sophia barely slept. The nun's words echoed in her mind. She knew I was coming. Why? What was this really about? But in the cold, gray light of morning, one thought was clear. She had to try. One last chance to keep her daughter. She found Sister Agnes in the kitchen. "I'd like to try for the ranch," Sophia said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. The nun simply nodded, as if she'd known all along. She drew Sophia a crude map, pressed $2 into her palm for emergencies, and sent her on her way. The road to the Galloway ranch was a lonely ribbon of dust. 10 miles, the nun had said. It felt like 100. The sun beat down, Lily grew fussy, and every step was a fresh agony on Sophia's blistered feet. By late afternoon, panic was setting in. Had she taken a wrong turn? Was she lost out here, with night coming on? Just as true despair began to take hold, she saw it. Nestled in a valley, a cluster of buildings. A 2-story house, a large barn, smoke curling from a chimney. The Galloway ranch. Relief surged through her, so powerful it almost buckled her knees. She pushed forward, ignoring the pain, her eyes fixed on the house. As she got closer, a dog started barking. A tall man emerged from the barn. Even from a distance, he looked imposing. Broad-shouldered, lean, moving with a kind of quiet power. As she drew nearer, she saw a face weathered by the sun, hair streaked with gray at the temples, and eyes the color of a winter sky. "Hush, Scout," the man commanded, and the dog fell silent. He just stood there, watching her approach, his expression unreadable, hard. "You're a long way from anywhere, ma'am." Sophia's throat was dry. "Are you Mr. Galloway?" "I am." His eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Sophia Dawson. Sister Agnes sent me, from Promise Valley. She said you were looking for a housekeeper." His gaze dropped to the baby in her arms. It was a cold, dismissive glance. "She did she?" He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. Sister Agnes failed to mention a baby. Sophia's heart, which had been so full of hope just moments before, turned to a cold, heavy stone in her chest. I understand if that changes things," she stammered, already turning to leave. "I can go back." "Night's coming on," he said, his voice flat, without a trace of warmth. You can stay for supper. But let's be clear, I'm not hiring a woman with a child. This is a working ranch, not a nursery." His words were like a slap. He turned and walked toward the house without a backward glance. For a moment, Sophia stood frozen, the humiliation and despair washing over her. But the wind was picking up. Lily was starting to whimper, and the thought of another night on the open road was impossible. Swallowing her pride, she followed him into the house. The inside was surprisingly clean, well kept for a bachelor. A fire crackled in the hearth. The air smelled of coffee and stew. Xavier Galloway led her to the kitchen, a large, warm room. "Stew's on," he said, not looking at her. "Sit down." She sat. He moved around the kitchen with an efficiency that suggested he'd been fending for himself for a long time. He poured her a cup of coffee, without asking if she wanted one, and placed it on the table. He didn't speak again until he'd ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them down. "Eat," he commanded. They ate in silence. The stew was good, the biscuits heavy but filling. Sophia was aware of his eyes on her, studying her, judging her. When Lily started to fuss, he just grunted. "There's a room off the kitchen. Tend to her in there." Grateful for the privacy, Sophia took Lily into the small, clean bedroom. She fed and changed her baby, her mind reeling. This wasn't the sanctuary Sister Agnes had described. This was a cold, hard place, run by a cold, hard man. The hope she'd nurtured all day had withered and died. When she returned to the kitchen, Xavier was waiting for her, leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "I'll let you and the child stay the night," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The storm's rolling in. In the morning, one of my hands will take you back to Promise Valley." "But Sister Agnes said—" "I don't care what Sister Agnes said," he cut her off. "I run this ranch, not her, and I say a baby has no place here. It's a distraction, a liability." Before Sophia could protest further, the back door opened and 2 men came in, stomping mud from their boots. One was a young man with a friendly face, the other was older, weathered, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Boss," the older one said, nodding to Xavier. Then his eyes fell on Sophia, and he stopped dead. His face went pale. He stared at Sophia as if he'd seen a ghost. Xavier noticed. "Jeb? What is it? This is Mrs. Dawson. She'll be staying the night." The man, Jeb, didn't seem to hear him. He took a hesitant step towards Sophia, his eyes wide with a look she couldn't decipher. It wasn't recognition. It was something else. Fear? Shock? "Dawson," Jeb whispered, his voice hoarse. "From Copper Creek." Sophia nodded, confused. "Yes. Do I know you?" Jeb ignored her question. He turned to Xavier, his face a mask of grim certainty. "Boss, we need to talk. Alone." He shot another look at Sophia, a look that was now filled with accusation. "Right now." Xavier's winter sky eyes narrowed, shifting from Jeb to Sophia and back again. The quiet kitchen suddenly crackled with a new, dangerous tension. Sophia's weary despair was replaced by a cold knot of dread. Something was terribly wrong. Xavier motioned Jeb into the front room. The younger hand, Lucas, looked awkwardly at Sophia before mumbling an excuse and disappearing out the back door. Sophia was left alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding against her ribs. She could hear their voices, low and urgent, but couldn't make out the words. What was happening? Who was this man, Jeb? Why did her name, her hometown, provoke such a terrifying reaction? After what felt like an eternity, the door to the sitting room opened. Xavier stood there, his face like a thundercloud. Jeb stood just behind him, his expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and something that looked like pity. "Mrs. Dawson," Xavier said, his voice dangerously low. "Jeb here seems to think he knows you." I don't think so," Sophia stammered. He says he worked a short stint at the Copper Creek mine last year, Xavier continued, his eyes boring into her. He says he remembers you, or rather, he remembers hearing about you. A cold sweat broke out on Sophia's skin. Hearing what? Xavier took a step into the room. He was no longer just a hard man. He was a judge, and she was the one on trial. He says the name Dawson was well known in Copper Creek, Xavier said, his voice dripping with ice. Known for thievery, for preying on the kindness of miners. He says your husband was a cheat and a scoundrel, and that you were his accomplice. The accusation was so monstrous, so utterly unbelievable, that for a moment Sophia couldn't even speak. She just stared at him, her mouth agape. That's a lie, she finally managed to choke out. My husband was a good man. He died in the mine collapse. Jeb spoke up from the doorway, his voice full of false regret. I'm sorry, ma'am. I truly am. But folks said Thomas Dawson was involved in high grading, stealing ore, and that you helped him sell it. When things got hot, he took off. The story about the collapse. Well, some folks always wondered if that was just a convenient way to disappear. It was a nightmare. This wasn't happening. This man was twisting her tragedy into a sordid tale of crime. No, Sophia cried, pulling Lily closer to her, as if to shield her from the poison in the air. Thomas is dead. I have nothing. Look at me. Do I look like the wife of a successful thief? Xavier's expression didn't soften. Desperation makes people do a lot of things, and liars are good at looking pitiful. He gestured around the kitchen. You come here, sent by a nun who seems to know more than she's telling, with a baby and a sob story. And my own foreman says you're a known criminal. He let the words hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. I am not a thief, Sophia said, her voice shaking with a mixture of terror and rage. I have never stolen anything in my life. Can you prove it? Xavier challenged. Can you give me one reason to believe you over my foreman of 15 years? She had nothing. No references, no friends to speak for her. Just the worn dress on her back, a hungry baby, and the wedding ring on her finger. The last piece of her life with Thomas. Her hand instinctively went to the simple gold band. This is all I have left of him, she said, her voice breaking. It's all I have left of our life together. Xavier's eyes fixed on the ring. Let me see it. His tone was a command, not a request. Numbly, Sophia twisted the ring off her finger. It felt strange, her hand suddenly bare after all this time. She held it out to him. He took it, his calloused fingers surprisingly deft. He turned it over, examining the worn gold. Jeb watched from the doorway, a smug, certain look on his face. Xavier held the ring up to the lantern light, squinting to see the inside. And then he froze. The air in the room went still. The hard, accusatory mask on Xavier's face dissolved, replaced by a look of utter, profound shock. His hand trembled slightly as he held the ring. Where? He said, his voice a strangled whisper. Did you get this? It was my husband's, Sophia said, bewildered by his reaction. He gave it to me. Xavier didn't seem to hear her. He stared at the ring, then looked at her, his winter sky eyes now filled with a storm of confusion and pain. There's an inscription, he said, his voice cracking. Inside the band. He looked from the ring to Sophia, then to Jeb, and back to the ring. He seemed to be seeing a ghost. It says, my love, my life, my forever, MG. He finally lifted his gaze to meet hers, and the look in his eyes chilled Sophia to the bone. MG, he repeated, his voice barely audible. Margaret Galloway, that was my wife's name. He held the ring out, his hand shaking. This was her wedding ring. It was buried with her 4 years ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Sophia stared at him, unable to process his words. His wife's ring? buried with her. It was impossible. Thomas had given her this ring. He'd bought it for her in the city before they were married. He'd told her so. Jeb was just as stunned. The smug look was gone, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. "Boss, are you sure?" "Am I sure?" Xavier's voice was a low growl. "I bought this ring. I put it on her finger. I held her hand as she died, and I made sure it stayed with her." He turned his furious, grief-stricken gaze back to Sophia. "So, I'll ask you again. Where did you get it?" "Thomas gave it to me," she repeated, her mind scrambling to make sense of the madness. He said it was new." "He lied," Xavier bit out. The accusation was gone, replaced by a raw, guttural pain. "This ring was stolen from my wife's grave." The implication was horrific. Grave robbing, the lowest, most despicable crime imaginable. "No," Sophia whispered. "Thomas wouldn't. He couldn't." But even as she said the words, 1,000 tiny forgotten details began to surface. Thomas's sudden trips, unexplained money, his secrecy about his family back east, the way he always avoided talking about his past. She had chalked it up to his dreamer personality, his focus on the future. Now it looked like something else entirely. Something dark. Jeb, seeing his initial accusation crumble, quickly changed his tune. "See, boss? I told you they were thieves. They're even worse than I thought. Grave robbers." But Xavier wasn't looking at Jeb. His focus was entirely on Sophia, but his expression had changed again. The fury was still there, but it was now mixed with a dawning, terrible understanding. "Jeb," Xavier said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You said you worked at the Copper Creek mine." "Yes, sir, I did. Just for a few months." "And you said you heard stories about Thomas Dawson being a high grader." "That's right, boss. Everyone was talking about it." "That's funny," Xavier said, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. "Because I remember those months very clearly. You were right here, on this ranch, helping me with the spring roundup. You haven't been off this property for more than a day or two in 5 years." Jeb's face went white. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was caught in a lie so blatant, so absolute, that there was no way to escape it. The whole story, the accusation that had almost destroyed Sophia, was a fabrication. "Why, Jeb?" Xavier's voice was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "Why would you lie about this woman? Why invent a story about her being a thief in Copper Creek?" Jeb started to stammer, backing away toward the door. I must have been mistaken. The name, it sounded familiar." "No," Xavier said, taking a deliberate step toward him. The younger hand, Lucas, had reappeared in the doorway behind Jeb, sensing the shift in the room, blocking his exit. "You weren't mistaken. You targeted her. You knew her name, and you lied to get me to throw her out." Xavier's eyes darted from Jeb's panicked face to the ring still clutched in his hand. And suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The lie, the ring, the grave. It wasn't just the grave, was it? Xavier's voice was low, filled with a terrible rising certainty. "Margaret was buried with the locket I gave her, the one with my picture in it. And her mother's pearls. All of it was taken." He looked at Jeb, a predator cornering his prey. "You were there. You and Thomas Dawson. You were partners." Jeb lunged for the door, but Lucas was ready. He grabbed the older man, and the two of them went down in a heap on the floor. Jeb was wiry, but Lucas was young and strong. The fight was over before it began. Xavier didn't even flinch. He walked over to the struggling men, knelt down and reached into Jeb's coat pocket. He pulled out a folded, grimy piece of paper. He stood up, his face grim, and unfolded it. It was a letter. He began to read it aloud, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Jeb, you old dog. By the time you get this, I'll be long gone." The mind collapse was the perfect cover. "Everyone thinks I'm dead and buried. I left the woman with the kid and nothing else. She's too stupid to figure anything out. Head to the Galloway ranch like we planned. Get a job there. Lay low. He's just a sad old widower. He won't suspect a thing. The most important thing is the ring. I had to leave it with her to make the marriage look real. Get it back from her, any way you can. The rest of the score is buried where we agreed, by the old oak struck by lightning on the North Ridge. Once you have the ring, meet me in Cheyenne in a month. We'll be rich men." Xavier finished reading and let the letter fall from his fingers. It fluttered to the floor like a dead leaf. The truth was out. All of it. Thomas wasn't dead. He was a liar, a thief, a monster who had faked his own death and abandoned his wife and child without a second thought. And Jeb, the trusted foreman, was his accomplice. He had accused Sophia of being a thief to drive her away, hoping to get his hands on the ring, the final piece of their stolen treasure. Sophia felt the floor drop out from under her. Her entire life, her marriage, her grief. It was all a lie, a cruel, elaborate lie. The man she had loved and mourned had never truly existed. He had used her, and he had planned to leave her destitute from the very beginning. She looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the destruction of their world. She had almost given her away because of the lies of a man who was supposed to be her father. Xavier looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not a hard rancher, but a man shattered by his own grief and betrayal. The grave of his beloved wife had been desecrated. His trust in his foreman had been betrayed. His home had been infiltrated by the very men who had violated his most sacred memories. Their two separate tragedies were now horribly intertwined, bound together by a simple gold ring. "He's coming back," Sophia whispered, the realization dawning on her. The letter said a month. "He'll be coming back for the ring." Xavier nodded, his jaw tight. He looked at Jeb, who was now being held firmly by Lucas. "Tie him up in the root cellar. He's not going anywhere." He then turned back to Sophia, his eyes holding a new, grim purpose. "Yes, he's coming back," Xavier said, his voice like steel. "And when he does, we'll be waiting for him." The ranch transformed into a fortress. The remaining hands, Lucas and a quiet man named Charlie, were brought into the circle of trust. They were loyal to Xavier, horrified by Jeb's betrayal, and fiercely protective of Sophia and Lily. They moved Jeb to the barn, keeping him under constant guard. Xavier tried to question him, but the old foreman was silent, his face a mask of sullen defeat. He knew his life was over. For Sophia, the days that followed were a blur of shock and sickening clarity. Every memory of Thomas was now tainted, every loving word a lie, every shared dream a hollow promise. She wasn't a widow. She was something else entirely, a discarded pawn in a criminal scheme. But through the haze of her shattered past, a new, unexpected feeling began to take root. A fierce, burning anger. Anger at Thomas, at Jeb, at her own blindness. And with that anger came a steely resolve she didn't know she possessed. She would not be a victim. She would not let this destroy her or her daughter. Xavier was her anchor in the storm. He treated her not with pity, but with a quiet, profound respect. He saw her not as a fool who'd been deceived, but as a survivor. They spent hours talking, sharing stories of the people they had lost, his Margaret, her Thomas, and finding a strange comfort in their shared betrayal. He told her about Margaret's kindness, her laughter, how she had filled the quiet house with life. Sophia, in turn, found herself able to speak of Thomas honestly for the first time, acknowledging the red flags she had ignored, the questions she had been too afraid to ask. One evening, as they sat in the kitchen after Lily was asleep, Xavier took the gold ring from his pocket where he'd kept it since that night. He held it in his palm. "This ring brought nothing but lies and pain into your life," he said softly. "But it also brought you here." He looked at her, his gaze direct and full of an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Maybe it can be a symbol of something else now, a new beginning." Before Sophia could respond, the dog, Scout, began to bark frantically from the yard. It wasn't his usual bark for a passing coyote. This was sharp, urgent, and angry. Xavier was on his feet in an instant. "Stay here! Lock the door!" He grabbed the rifle he kept mounted over the fireplace and was gone into the night. Lucas and Charlie, alerted by the dog, came running from the bunkhouse, their own rifles in hand. Sophia's heart hammered in her chest. She ran to the window, peering out into the darkness. A storm was blowing in, the wind howling, rattling the windows. She couldn't see anything but swaying trees and the driving rain that had just begun to fall. The letter had said a month. It had been 3 weeks. He had come back early. The sounds from outside were terrifying. Shouts, the dog's frenzied barking, and then a sound that made Sophia's blood run cold. A gunshot. She screamed, clutching her hand to her mouth. Lily, woken by the noise, began to cry from the other room. Sophia ran to her, scooping her out of her cradle, her mind racing with 1,000 terrible possibilities. Was Xavier hurt? Was Thomas in the house? She backed into the corner of the room, holding Lily tight, her eyes darting toward the door, expecting it to burst open at any moment. The house, which had become a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The sounds outside died down, replaced only by the roar of the wind and rain. Who had won? Who was still standing? Then she heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy, slow footsteps. The door handle rattled. She held her breath. The door creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted against the stormy night, dripping water onto the floor. It was Xavier. He was alone. His face was grim, his clothes soaked, but he was unharmed. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, his chest heaving. "It's over," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Sophia, trembling with relief, hurried out to meet him. "What happened? Are you all right?" "He came just as the storm hit," Xavier explained, running a hand through his wet hair. "Thought he could use it as cover. He went for the barn first, to free Jeb." Xavier's eyes were dark. "We were waiting for him. When he opened the barn door, we had him. He tried to run. I fired a warning shot. He gave up after that." The man she had once called her husband, the father of her child, was tied up in the barn alongside his partner in crime. The nightmare was finally, truly over. In the morning, Xavier and Lucas rode into Promise Valley, bringing Thomas and Jeb with them. They returned late that night with the town sheriff, who took formal statements and officially declared the case closed. The stolen goods from Margaret's grave were recovered, along with a significant sum of money from other robberies, all buried by the lightning-scarred oak tree. The law declared that the money, having no other claimants, belonged to the Galloway Ranch. But Xavier wanted none of it. That night, after the sheriff had left and a fragile peace had settled over the ranch, Xavier found Sophia on the porch, staring out at the stars. He stood beside her, not speaking for a long moment. "The sheriff told me something," he finally said. "Thomas Dawson wasn't his real name. He was a career criminal from back east, wanted in 3 states. He had a reputation for charming lonely women, robbing them blind, and disappearing." Sophia felt a strange sense of detachment. The man in the barn had no connection to the man she thought she'd married. He was a phantom, a lie she had lived. "What will happen to him?" she asked. "He'll hang," Xavier said simply. "Him and Jeb both." It was a stark and brutal end, but Sophia felt no grief. only a profound, aching emptiness and a fierce, protective love for the daughter who was the only good thing to come from all the lies. "What will you do now?" Xavier asked gently. Sophia looked at him. In just a few short weeks, this hard, solitary man had become her staunchest ally, her protector, her confidant. He had seen her at her most vulnerable and had shown her nothing but strength and respect. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I have Lily. That's all that matters. We'll find a way." Xavier turned to face her, his expression serious. "You have more than that. The reward money for his capture. It's substantial. The sheriff said, by law, it belongs to you. You and Lily will be taken care of. You can go anywhere you want. Start a new life." The offer was staggering. Freedom, independence, a chance to leave Wyoming and all its painful memories behind. She could go to San Francisco, just like the real Thomas had always dreamed. But as she looked around the quiet ranch, at the sturdy house that had sheltered her, at the man who stood before her, she realized she didn't want to go anywhere. This felt more like home than any place she had ever known. "I don't want the money, Xavier," she said softly. He looked surprised. "But it's your right." "I want a job," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I came here looking for work as a housekeeper. The position is still open, isn't it?" A slow smile spread across Xavier's face, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes and transformed his weathered features. "The position is open," he said, "but I was hoping to offer you a promotion." He took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "This house has been quiet for too long, Sophia. Empty. You and Lily, you've brought life back into it. You've brought life back into me." He took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "Don't stay as my housekeeper. Stay as my partner, as my wife." The proposal hung in the cool night air, more shocking and more wonderful than anything she could have imagined. Her heart, which she thought was broken beyond repair, suddenly felt full to bursting. "Xavier," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. This time they were not tears of grief or fear, but of an overwhelming, unexpected joy. "I know it soon," he said quickly, "and your life has been turned upside down, but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Sophia. And I already love that little girl in there, as if she were my own." She didn't need to think. She didn't need time. The answer was as clear and bright as the stars above them. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Xavier. Yes." He pulled her into his arms, and his kiss was not one of desperate passion, but of promise. A promise of safety, of honesty, of a future built not on lies, but on a truth they had uncovered together. 5 years later, Sophia stood on that same porch, watching her husband teach their daughter, Lily, how to ride her first pony. Their son, William, a rambunctious 4-year-old with his father's winter sky eyes, toddled in the yard, chasing the chickens. The ranch was thriving. The house was filled with the sounds of laughter and life. Sophia's hand rested on her belly, where a third child was quietly growing. Life hadn't just given her a second chance. It had given her a life more real and more full of love than she had ever known. The woman who had staggered into Promise Valley, ready to give up everything, was a distant memory. She had found her home. She had found her justice. And in the most unexpected way imaginable, she had found her promise. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of unbelievable twists and ultimate justice.